The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic, hypnotic chant, a sound that was counting down the final seconds of a world I had known my whole life. On the steps of the county courthouse, under the blazing afternoon sun, a small crowd had gathered, but I only saw one person. Her, Brenda, the president of the Crystal Shores Homeowners Association. She stood with her slick, expensive lawyer, her arms crossed, a look of smug, predatory triumph on her face. She was about to see her greatest enemy vanquished and acquire the very land her kingdom was built on, all for pennies on the dollar. The bid stands at $100,000 to the Crystal Shores HOA. The auctioneer called out, his eyes scanning the small crowd. Do I hear 101? Going once? Going twice? Brenda's smile widened. Her lawyer gave her a congratulatory pat on the shoulder. This was it, the final blow. And then a quiet voice cut through the thick, humid air. Voice. That was steady and clear, though my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I might pass out. Was my voice. $1 million. The auctioneer's gavel, which had been halfway through its final fateful descent, stopped dead in midair. A collective, stunned gasp went through the crowd. Brenda's head whipped around, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of utter horror. She stared at me, the quiet, retired librarian she had been terrorizing for a year, as if she were seeing a ghost. And in a way, she was. The ghost of all her bad decisions, coming back to haunt her. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment on the courthouse steps, you have to understand the lake, the cabin, and the quiet man who was my neighbor. My name is Evelyn. For 35 years, my life was the quiet, orderly world of a research librarian. I dealt in facts, in primary sources, in the calm, steady truth of recorded history. After my husband Thomas passed away 2 years ago, I found myself adrift in a world that was suddenly too loud and too empty. My only anchor was our family's cabin. It was a small, charming, historic cabin on the shores of Crystal Lake, a place my grandfather had built in the 1940s. It was a place of deep family history. I had spent my childhood summers there. It was where Thomas had proposed to me. It was our sanctuary. And after he was gone, it became mine. But the world around the cabin had changed. The quiet, wooded shoreline of my youth had been replaced by a massive upscale development called Crystal Shores. It was a world of identical beige mansions, of pristine, chemically treated lawns, and of a powerful, overbearing HOA, and the absolute ruler of this new, sterile world was Brenda. Brenda was a former real estate developer who had gotten herself elected HOA president on a platform of protecting our investment. She was a woman who saw the world in terms of property values and aesthetic conformity. My humble, historic, and, most importantly, non-member cabin was a deep, personal affront to her vision of a perfect, homogeneous community. The land the HOA was built on belonged to a man named Mr. Henderson, a reclusive, elderly man who had inherited the large parcel from his own father. He was a kind, gentle soul who had fallen on hard times, a fact that Brenda would later use as a weapon. My first interaction with Brenda was a perfect foreshadowing of the war to come. She marched up to my porch a week after I moved in full-time, not with a welcome basket, but with a clipboard and a list of demands disguised as a friendly chat. "Evelyn," she'd said, her eyes scanning my rustic, slightly overgrown garden with open distaste. "I'm Brenda, the president of the Crystal Shores Lakefront Property Owners Association. Now that you're living here, we'll need you to join. It's for the cohesive management of our primary asset, the lake." "Thank you, Brenda," I'd said politely, though my hackles were already up. "But this property has never been part of an association. It predates your development by 50 years. I won't be joining." Her smile became a thin, hard line. "Everyone on this lake plays by my rules, Evelyn," she'd said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "One way or another, the war began with the water. The HOA board, at Brenda's direction, passed a new sweeping lake usage and vessel registration bylaw. It declared that all boats, canoes, and even paddleboards used on the lake were required to display an official Crystal Shores HOA sticker. The sticker, of course, came with a hefty $500 annual fee. She was trying to charge me. To use my own lake, I of course ignored it. I knew my rights. My family had owned our cabin and the lake itself for generations. This was a fact that was clearly recorded in the old leather-bound folio of deeds my grandfather had left me, a fact I assumed was common knowledge. But Brenda, I was learning, had a stunning disregard for any facts that didn't suit her own narrative. A few days later, I was out on the water in my small, quiet electric fishing boat, enjoying the morning mist. Suddenly, a large, obnoxious pontoon boat with Crystal Shores security emblazoned on the side came roaring up, creating a massive wake that nearly swamped my little vessel. It was the HOA's private security patrol. "Ma'am." "Oh." One of the guards yelled at me through a bullhorn. "You are in violation of Bylaw 7.4. Your vessel does not have a community registration sticker. I'm going to have to ask you to return to shore immediately and issue you a citation." The sheer unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. I was being pulled over on my own lake. My quiet librarian's patience, which was usually vast, snapped. "You are on private property." I yelled back, my voice shaking with a rage that surprised even me. "This is my lake. If you do not leave my property immediately, I will be calling the sheriff and having you charged with criminal trespassing and harassment." There must have been something in my voice, a tone of absolute, unwavering certainty that gave them pause. They looked at each other, confused, then reluctantly turned their ridiculous party barge around and motored back to the HOA's dock, leaving me fuming in their wake. The war was now officially on. Brenda, unable to control me on the water, turned her attention to my land. The violation notices started appearing, a blizzard of white envelopes in my mailbox. Fine for my unapproved, dilapidated dock, the beautiful weathered dock my grandfather had built. A fine for my overgrown and unmanaged shoreline, which was actually a carefully cultivated native plant buffer I had designed to protect the lake's ecosystem. At the same time, I started to hear disturbing rumors the HOA was going after old Mr. Henderson, the quiet man who owned the land their houses were built on. They were burying him in fines for the state of his own unoccupied home, for overgrown grass, for peeling paint. It was a classic, predatory HOA tactic: fine an elderly, vulnerable resident into oblivion, place a lien on their property, and then foreclose. Acquiring their land for pennies on the dollar, my librarian's instincts, my lifelong passion for research and uncovering the truth, kicked into high gear. This was no longer just about me. It was about a good man being bullied. I went to the county records office, spent days poring over deeds, tax records, and plat maps. And what I found made my blood run cold. Mr. Henderson. Yes. His health failing and his savings depleted by medical bills, was years behind on his property taxes. His massive, valuable parcel of land, the land that the entire Crystal Shores development sat upon, was scheduled to be sold at a county tax auction in 2 months. And I also found the lien, a massive, 6-figure lien that the Crystal Shores HOA had placed on his property for their trumped-up fines and legal fees. I finally understood her endgame. It was a brilliant and utterly evil plan. She wasn't just harassing Mr. Henderson. She was positioning the HOA to be the sole bidder at the tax auction. They would acquire his land for the cost of the back taxes, a fraction of its real value. They would become their own landlords. And once they owned all the land, their power would be absolute. They could then use that power to crush me there. Last remaining obstacle. Just as I was piecing this together, the next blow fell. I received a terrifying letter from the HOA's lawyer. They were suing me, not for fines, but for damages. They were suing me for damaging the community's primary asset, the lake, by my willful refusal to participate in its financial upkeep and environmental management. It was a completely insane, baseless lawsuit, a work of pure legal fiction, But it was designed to do one thing: bury me in legal fees, to drain my resources and my will to fight. Right before the auction that would seal their final victory, the day of the tax auction arrived. It was a hot, oppressive day. I had made a decision, a terrifying, life-altering decision. I had spent the last month quietly liquidating my husband's life, insurance policy, and a significant portion of my retirement savings. It was a massive gamble, a bet on the truth, a bet on my grandfather's legacy. I arrived at the courthouse steps and saw them. Brenda and her lawyer, looking like vultures waiting for a carcass to drop. They saw me in the small crowd, and Brenda gave me a cruel, dismissive sneer. She thought I was there to witness her final triumph, to watch my own doom being sealed. She had no idea I was there to rain fire down upon her kingdom. And that brings us back to that moment. The moment the world stopped. The moment I said the two words that changed everything. $1 million. The auctioneer, a man who had probably seen it all, looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. "Ma'am," he stammered, "the bid is $100,000. Are you bidding $1 million? "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. $1 million. Cash. A stunned, electric silence fell over the crowd. Brenda looked like she had been physically struck. Her face was a grotesque mask of disbelief and dawning, apocalyptic horror. Her lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear. They had come with a cashier's check for maybe $150,000, enough to cover the taxes and secure the property. They had never in their wildest dreams anticipated a real bidder, let alone a bid of this magnitude. $1 million, the auctioneer repeated, his voice now filled with a new respect. Going once, going twice. "Sold," he cried, his gavel cracking down like a thunderclap. To the lady in the back. The aftermath of the auction was a scene of pure, beautiful chaos. Brenda, her face a blotchy, tear-streaked mess, actually ran over to me as I was signing the paperwork. "How?" she shrieked, her voice a raw, desperate sound. "How could you possibly afford this? You're just a librarian. This is my community, my land." I looked her dead in the eye, the quiet, non-confrontational librarian gone forever, replaced by someone she had never met. "No, Brenda," I said, my voice cold as the deep waters of the lake. "It's mine now. You wanted a war. You just never bothered to check your enemy's war chest." But the acquisition of the land was only the first part of my counterattack. The second part was delivered the very next morning. My lawyer, armed with a file thick with my grandfather's original, notarized deeds, and my own meticulously gathered evidence, served Brenda and every member of the Crystal Shores HOA board. With our own lawsuit, the lawsuit began by presenting the irrefutable, certified evidence that I, through my family's trust, is the sole and private owner of the entirety of Azure Lake. It then went on to detail the HOA's decade-long campaign of illegal trespassing and the unauthorized construction of their beach clubhouse and boat dock on my private property. Their lawsuit against me for damaging the lake was now Exhibit A, and my own lawsuit against them for trespassing on it. The full picture was now revealed. In all its devastating glory, not only was I now the owner of all the land their houses were on, their new landlord, but I had also always owned the lake they had built their entire community's identity and value upon. They were not just my tenants, they were my squatters. And I had a bill for a decade of back rent. The Crystal Shores Homeowners Association was completely and utterly broken. They were the tenants of the woman they had tried to destroy, and they owed her a fortune in damages and retroactive lease payments for the use of her lake. Brenda was finished. Facing a massive lawsuit from me, and a barrage of new lawsuits from her own enraged residents for her gross mismanagement, her failure to do basic due diligence, and for leading them all into financial ruin, she sold her house to a shell corporation I had set up at a very steep discount and disappeared in the dead of night. The first thing I did as the new landowner was to visit Mr. Henderson. I found him in his small, cluttered home, a kind, frail man who was terrified he was about to be evicted. I sat with him at his kitchen table and handed him a document. It was a new deed, granting him a lifetime right to live in his home, on his land, completely free. of any rent or fees for the rest of his days. The look of relief on his face, the tears that welled up in his old, tired eyes, this was a victory far sweeter than any legal triumph. For the rest of the residents, I became the benevolent dictator my grandfather would have wanted me to be. I dissolved the tyrannical HOA. In its place, I had my lawyers draft new, simple, individual land lease agreements. The fees were a fraction of what Brenda had charged, and they went into a professionally managed trust dedicated to one thing: only the environmental health and preservation of the lake. The only rule was the one my grandfather had always lived by: be a good neighbor. This whole brutal war taught me a lesson I had spent my life studying in books, but had never understood. In my bones. History matters, the truth matters. People who build their little kingdoms on a foundation of arrogance and assumptions are living on borrowed land and borrowed time. Brenda was so busy trying to draw her own new, ugly lines on the map, she never bothered to look at the old, true map that was there all along. She tried to erase my history, and in the end, her own future was the only thing that got deleted. The neighborhood is more peaceful now than it's ever been. Mr. Henderson's health not as even improved. But the developer who originally sold the land to Mr. Henderson's father has just emerged from a corporate bankruptcy, and his lawyers are claiming a fraudulent conveyance in the original 1950s deed transfer for the lake bed. They're demanding it back.